Good morning or afternoon or evening, whenever you happen to be watching this. My name is Julie. I am a mental health counselor in South Carolina, and this dog who's just off screen right now is my co-counselor, Ed. As usual, I'm going to be talking about some of the things that I've been learning in my studies, and right now I'm still going through Brenè Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart, and today we're going to be exploring the places we go with others. Emotions that we experience like compassion, pity, empathy, boundaries, sympathy, and comparative suffering. Sit back and let's learn about these things together. All right, so welcome back up on my stool here, and going to talk about the emotions, the places we go with others. And the first one that Brenè Brown talks about in this particular chapter is compassion. And she speaks of compassion as being a daily practice, something we do. It's an act of recognizing and accepting our shared humanity so that we treat others and ourselves with loving kindness, and we take action in the face of suffering. And one of the big pieces of compassion is empathy, which is a skill set that we can develop. And empathy is a skill set, and empathy is a skill set of powerful tools of compassion. So let's talk about this a little bit further. When we have compassion that is fueled by understanding, we have this understanding that I'm no better than you are, that life is full of struggle, then I can relax and I can move in close when I have the understanding that none of us are perfect and that we all do struggle. I have struggles and you have struggles, and we have this common struggle of humanity. So I'm not better than you. It then becomes a relationship of equals. It's knowing the darkness that's in myself so that I know the darkness that's in you, and I can connect. I also know the light that's in me and the light that is in you. Compassion helps us sit in the dark with someone else and not be in discomfort, because we understand what it is to be human. I'm not here to fix this or fix you, because some things honestly can't be fixed, but I can sit with you in this experience and I can accept you in it. That's compassion. The near enemy of compassion is pity. It sees the pain, it sees the suffering, and it says, poor you, I'm glad that isn't me. That's pity. It's a near enemy of compassion because we feel bad for the person, but we're not equals. You're down there and I'm up here and I'm looking at it, and I'm so glad that it isn't me that's experiencing what you are experiencing right now. There are 4 elements Brenè talks about that make pity feel really bad. And the first is the belief that the other person that is suffering is inferior to us in some way, like, oh, poor you, right? And it just feels bad to the person who is having pity kind of heaped on them. We don't like this. Her second thing that she talks about in these elements is that there's this passive self-focused reaction that doesn't involve helping. It's like, ooh, yuck, I don't like that's happening to you, but I keep myself separate from it. And then there's that desire to maintain, to keep that emotional distance that makes us feel even worse. And there's an avoidance of sharing the other person's suffering. We don't really want to know about it. We just want to tell them that we feel bad for them. That's pity. And it's a near enemy of compassion, because it can be close to, and we might feel like we're offering compassion, but if we're not willing to step in and relate to and really be with the person, if we're elevating ourselves over them, then that's not compassion, that's pity. And it doesn't feel good to receive pity. It does feel good to have a compassionate word from a friend. Empathy, as I stated earlier, and Brenè writes in her book, is the most powerful tool of compassion. It's an emotional skill where we understand the experience of others and then we reflect back that understanding. It's connecting with how someone's feeling in the experience. We don't have to have had the experience before. I can know that it would feel really bad to be fired from a job. I've never been fired from a job, but I can know that it would feel really bad to be fired from a job. I might be afraid of how I'm going to make ends meet because I'm losing that income. I can feel embarrassed and ashamed. Like, I can know that all of those things might be a part of it, even though I've never experienced it. And empathy is about understanding the emotions and reflecting back that understanding that experience. It strengthens relationship bonds and helps us to, it allows better understanding of how we see others and how others see us when there is a level of empathy. So if we teach empathy to people, we can understand each other better, we can connect better, and it enhances pro-social and altruistic behavior. There are two meaningful pieces, two elements of empathy, and it's cognitive empathy and affective empathy. And cognitive empathy is basically perspective taking, recognizing and understanding how somebody else feels, their emotions. Affective empathy is an emotional attunement to others. So I'm not laughing when you're telling sad stories. Like I'm tracking with you. My mood is matching what you're saying. Now this can be developed. Empathy can be taught to people. Teresa Wiseman has developed these steps, these pieces, so that you can develop empathy, and Brenè lists them in her book, and I'm just going to read them because it's so important for us to develop greater empathy, to be able to grow in our relationships with one another, and again, to increase pro-social behavior. So the first attribute of empathy is perspective taking. What does that concept mean for you? What's that experience like for you? It's a lot of questioning at this first spot. And then number two is to stay out of judgment. Just listen. Don't put value on it. Just listen to what the other person's saying so that you can hear, so that you can understand. And number three is to recognize the emotion. How can I touch within myself something that helps me identify and connect with what the other person might be feeling, like I said earlier about the job. Check in and clarify what you're hearing. Ask questions. I do this often in the therapeutic space. I'll check in with the person. I think that must have felt this way for you. Is that close? And the person might go, well, no, not really. It was more like this, right? We don't have to be spot on to be able to offer, like, I would think that would feel this way. Are you feeling this way? Or are you feeling something else? Ask questions. Number four is to communicate and understand about the emotion. Sometimes this is elaborate and detailed, and sometimes this is simply, wow, I get it. That's hard, right? And so we want to communicate that we understand what they're going through. Like if somebody lost their job, you want to be able to say to them, oh man, I know that you must be devastated. You were blindsided by that. Like, kind of came out of nowhere. You had such a good review last month, and now you lost your job, right? And then practicing mindfulness by Kristen Neff. It's not pushing away the emotion because it's uncomfortable, but feeling it and moving through it. So as empathy being a tool of compassion, it helps us to be present with the other individual, helps us to experience with them and to connect with them, to let them know that they're not alone in what they're feeling. Now, sympathy is different than empathy. And again, sympathy, it would be the near enemy of empathy. And it's, I feel sorry for you. Where I'm separate and I'm looking down at you. It's another not me, but I feel sorry for you. Kind of a disconnection kind of emotion. Cancer patients talk about sympathy from people a lot in their descriptions of superficial, unwanted, pity-based responses though these comments are well intended, it really conveys that the person who communicated was uncomfortable. Like, oh, I feel so sorry for you going through that, instead of, oh, I know that you are devastated getting that news and it's really hard to go to all of these doctor's appointments. How can I help? Right? Do you hear the difference between those two? As I said, it is the near enemy of empathy, again, with that disconnection, that level of discomfort in the experience, and that separateness. There's no common humanity in it. There are lots of empathy misses, sympathy versus empathy, feeling sorry for you, kind of a bless your heart kind of a thing. Judgment is another empathy miss. Have you ever told a story and somebody goes, oh, my goodness, I can't believe you did that. You should have felt, or I bet you felt, and you're like, well, I wasn't mortified by it at all. I'm telling you a funny story, right? It's a judgment kind of piece that they're bringing to it. Sometimes there's even disappointment as an empathy miss. They can't believe that you responded in a certain way. They're just disappointed in your behavior. And you're like, wait a second, this is my experience. That another empathetic miss that Brenè discusses is discharging discomfort with blame. It's that comment that parents often make. Parents are often hit this one with, what were you thinking? I can't believe you did that. It's an empathetic miss, rather than saying to the child, oh, you must have been so embarrassed when you didn't have your school project done, or you must have, I imagine you felt embarrassed when you fell in front of everybody, or, whatever it happens to be. Another empathy miss would be minimizing or avoidance. We want to make it go away, and so we're like, oh, it's not that bad. It really wasn't that bad. And I think back to a time when I went to give a small talk to a group of women at an exercise program, and I didn't do well. I froze up while I was speaking. And my friend, she meant to make me feel better, but she said it really wasn't that bad. Oh, it was bad. It was not my best. And, I love her dearly. And if you're watching this, I love you dearly. But it was bad. But it was minimizing to avoid the pain of it, because it really wasn't well done. Then there's another empathy miss would be comparing or competing. When somebody says to you, that's nothing, this happened to me, right? It's an empathy miss. Rather than saying, yeah, that must have been horrible, let me share an experience with you, they jump to their experience instead. And it's an empathy miss, right? It can't, and I see people being vilified for doing this. But we can do this when we get excited in conversations and we're going back and forth with really good friends. It's not always that people are terrible, right? It is one of these things that we end up doing in conversations, but recognize that if we can give the empathetic comment first and then share, if we can be more mindful and present, then we won't have the empathetic miss as well. Speaking truth to power is another empathetic miss that can happen that she speaks about. When somebody says to you, oh, I can't believe you said that to your boss. What were you thinking? Instead, maybe saying to them, that must have been really hard. It was brave of you to do that, would be a more empathetic kind of comment. Advice giving or problem solving can be an empathetic miss. Sometimes it's our first instinct because we want to help, right? Jumping right to problem solving, solution focused stuff. But listening and allowing the person to tell their story and being able to be there, be present, and be able to validate and express the emotions and connect with the person, and then ask them, how can I help? Would you like me to troubleshoot some problem solving scenarios with you, or do you just need me to continue listening? That would be very empathetic and helpful to an individual. Now, initially when I read this chapter and Brenè goes on next to talk about boundaries, I thought, well, this is odd to be in a chapter with compassion and empathy and sympathy and pity. But boundaries are a must for us to experience compassion and empathy. In order for you to really connect with somebody else, you do have to know where you end and they begin. A lack of boundaries can lead to judgment even, because I am going to tell you how to feel. I'm going to tell you what your experience is. There's not that differentiation between us. I have to have boundaries in relationship. I can tell you what's okay and what's not okay then with compassion and with empathy. I can tell you that it's okay for you to be upset when I have boundaries, and I can stay with you. It's not okay for you to yell and pound your fists and throw things and threaten me, because that frightens me. I can't be here present with you if you're doing those things. It's okay to disagree with me when I'm talking with you, but it's not okay for you to ridicule me. And I can't have that same level of connection with somebody if I don't have appropriate boundaries. And I did a whole bunch on boundaries. Go back and check on some of those boundaries videos that I've posted earlier. I highly encourage you to watch those. Boundaries are super, super important for us. Boundaries are important in healthcare professionals and frankly in all individuals if we're going to have healthy relationships. If I don't know where I end and where you begin, then I end up carrying your emotions and feeling for you instead of understanding how you're feeling. If I'm feeling for you, if I'm feeling responsible for feeling your feelings along with you, then that leads to professional burnout in those areas. And I don't want to be doing that. I want to understand how you're feeling, but I don't need to carry how you feel. Those are your feelings. That bubble, that boundary bubble is around me. I can understand how you feel without having to take on how you feel, right? And it's important for me to be able to have appropriate compassion and empathy, to have appropriate boundaries to be able to do that. She ends with a little bit on comparative suffering. And she talks about fear and scarcity triggering comparative suffering. And they displace compassion and empathy if we aren't careful. And she mentions the fact that it happened a lot during COVID. Because when hurt and pain are ranked as they were when people were engaging online on social media, we see a lot of comparative suffering on social media. You feel this way, you must not feel this way. And you know, my mother died, that grief is worse than your child not attending graduation. It doesn't allow us to engage in pro-social emotions. But what we need to understand, and I came back from a mission trip from Nicaragua a few years back, what we need to understand is that family in Nicaragua doesn't benefit more when concern is held only for them and withheld from a child here who is suffering, my child or my grandchild, right? If somebody here is suffering, I need to offer compassion to them. There is hurt and suffering. There are hurt and suffering people all over the place. There are people without food in other countries. That doesn't mean that somebody is not hungry here or that somebody is hungry here, right? Because somebody is starving on the other side of the world doesn't mean that I am hungry here. So comparative suffering doesn't help us. It doesn't enable pro-social emotions, and it comes out of fear and pain and scarcity. It's about perspective. It's about understanding that there can be multiple pains and joys happening all around us, all at once. I can understand what you're experiencing and still be experiencing my own things. If we engage with compassion and empathy, our connection with others increases, and so does the quality of our relationships as a result. I hope that you learned something from this today. I hope that you pick up Brenè's book. It's phenomenal. There's so much more in it that I can't get into in a short little episode here on YouTube. If you enjoyed it, like, subscribe, share. I would love it if you would. But if you don't, you are still welcome here at Orange Therapy on YouTube, exactly as you are.